Hi, Michael, and maybe Fernando, and anyone else who's watching. I've been asked to do a view from the other side of the pond, from the UK. My name is Graham Allen, and I'm coming to you live or recorded from Westminster, in the heart of London, and looking forward to talking with you. If you want to talk to me a little bit more after this, then by all means email me. My email is grahamwilliamallen, A-L-L-E-N, that's all one word, at outlook.com. grahamwilliamallen@outlook.com. So just a little bit about me before I get into campaign 2020 and everything to do with that and the consequences of that, and my take on the democratic consequences too. So I know Michael very well, and I've had the privilege of speaking with Michael to students at LMU on several occasions, and summer schools, and when they visited London too. Always very happy to do that. And again, if you want to talk to me, if you're doing a paper and you want a UK point of view, by all means get in touch with me. In terms of my personal career, probably a quick summary would be, for 30 years I was a member of Parliament just over the road here. If I turn the camera around, we could almost see the House of Commons, and I represented the place I was born, which is called Nottingham North, and I was the Member of Parliament for Nottingham North for that length of time. I did a few things during that period. I was the Select Committee Chair, which is like equivalent to a congressional committee, the Select Committee on Political and Constitutional Reform, and we wrote a lot of documents and did a lot of inquiries into how to improve our democracy, much needed. And I was the chair of it from 2010 to 2015. The incoming majority Conservative government then abolished the committee because clearly there couldn't have been any need for further reform of our wonderful democratic system in the UK. Maybe. What else can I tell you? Just a little bit of background. My wife Alison is American, from California, and obviously we have interesting chats about the presidential contest, and also we have interesting chats about the British democratic or undemocratic culture, and I'll allude to some of those things as I speak. So big picture is this election coming up for the President of the United States is a very important election. I never said when I was a Member of Parliament that any election was anything other than the most important we've ever had. That's what politicians do. Actually now, with a little bit of distance since I stepped down from being a Member of Parliament in 2017, with 3 years distance, I think I can honestly say that this is the most important election. And interestingly, it's not just the most important election for the United States. It's the most important presidential election for the UK, for Europe, and for the rest of the planet. And let me just say a little bit on each of those areas. Why is it important for the UK? I think it's important for the UK because initially they are, if you like, testing a number of areas which, certainly if the incumbent is successful, there will be other parties across the world who will learn, I would argue, bad lessons, but will learn lessons from the United States and from the way the campaign was run. That's always been the case, whether it was Obama doing the social media stuff and communication stuff. Whoever does stuff, that knowledge does spread. But there's some bad stuff in the mix, unfortunately, particularly around voter suppression, which our Conservative Party in the UK is interested in and are already bringing forward stuff around voter ID, making that harder, redrawing all the boundaries in the United Kingdom for the next parliamentary election. So there's a number of those things which we don't particularly want to be successful. I think, as a Democrat, small d, rather than as a partisan politician. I hope Democrats of all political persuasions will join with us in trying to resist any of those imports should they be successful in the United States and the presidential election. So they're, relatively speaking, small things. In terms of the European Union, I think it's extremely important for the European Union because although Britain is now on its way out of the European Union, the European Union is an enormous trading bloc, and it has not enjoyed good relations with the current president, and that is deeply unfortunate because there are really important trade decisions, and good relations are important at all points anyway. But I think it's really important for the European Union that it doesn't have further problems on the international scale with the United States. And from what I understand of the various candidates, Mr. Biden is more interested in building up those relationships, not into uniformity, but just to have sensible, coherent discussions, which has been the hallmark of the relationship between America and the US and the UK and the European Union from presidents of all parties. That has been broken in the last 4 years. So I hope very much that that is restored as a result of the forthcoming presidential election. Globally, obviously, it's important on a number of areas. Probably the most important is the impact on democracy, but very closely following that, because I'll talk about that in a moment, but very closely following that in terms of issue importance is climate change. And we are working around the United States at the moment, rather than having the United States as the leading partner of all the other nations in the world and the example setter. Examples are being set in the wrong way at the moment, and that, as always, gives people permission to do things the way that the President of the United States is doing. And in this case, you're getting people like Bolsonaro and others who are adopting a climate change denial position. That would be bad enough 30 years ago. Right now, with the clock ticking, it's pretty significant and pretty important. I'll give a couple of references, and that's my first one, which is pretty much about what we need to do together on climate change. And I found this really helpful, Naomi Klein's On Fire, and I've found that chimes more with my view and probably a European view of what we need to do urgently on climate change. So very important from our point of view that we restore United States leadership, because that then magnetizes India, China and others back into the ring, back into making significant and speedy progress and being the opinion leader of the world. And that's certainly the leadership that I think is necessary. And may I say, it's incumbent upon the most powerful democracy in the world to take that mantle of leadership. So What else? I guess in terms of globalization, setting an example again, I've got to say, and glad to mention this early on in proceedings, that as I speak, and you may be watching this many days, weeks or months after these events, but the events even in the last week or so in the United States, because it is a global village, people react and people take sides across the globe, which often isn't given much account in the United States. But it really is important what the President of the United States is saying in respect of race relations and in respect of Black Lives Matter, and the scenes that we've seen which have shocked people, including me, as a great friend of the United States and someone who's traveled regularly to the United States, never really understood the brutal nature of policing in the United States. And we probably assumed that it was a little bit more like the Bobby on the beat, walking down the street in central London. And some of us, me included, have had a rude awakening about the level of brutality, and also the ease with which police officers pull the guns out of their holsters and are prepared to use them, unfortunately, and other weapons. Again, I'll come on to the impact of how that sort of messaging gets around the world because of social media and the lack of constraints on social media. But just for now, example setting, all of us in all positions in life, whether you're a parent or a representative or a president, have a great responsibility not to deliberately or subtly give permission for people to behave in the worst possible way. Okay, so I don't think the Trump phenomena is something that is new. I don't think this all started with Trump. I think it goes back a long way. You can certainly look at the Tea Party, you can certainly look at Newt Gingrich, you can certainly look at people who gave themselves that authority not to cooperate. And certainly with Obama and with Clinton, the view that there wasn't a bigger cause than your own party. Well, if you're a Democrat, there is a bigger cause. It is what your country can do for itself and for others, and what the electorate can do for themselves and for others. And that was undermined, and in a way, the manuals have been written in the last couple of years on how you break down democracies, how people can undermine democracies. There are many, and I've got one here, which, if you're interested, I found particularly helpful, which is Levitsky and Ziblatt, How Democracies Die, is well worth a look. And it's, like I said, sadly, almost a manual if you wanted to do the bad things. Firstly, break down the informal democracy in terms of people talking to each other, people being reasonable, people listening, and people trying to find common ground for the greater good of the communities they all represent. It's a sadness that has not happened. Then, of course, there's other parts of that breakdown, which is around executive power, legislative power, and judicial accountability, which I'll say a word about later. Maybe just as, again, a general answer right now, education in all its facets, not just at school, not just at home, not just in civic duty, is something you cannot do when an election appears. It's something you've got to feel if you're a democratic country and a democratic person, and that duty to put over the things around democracy. And I think probably one of the most unhelpful things, although it was a summation of some of the arguments around at the time, was Fukuyama and his end of politics, that there was a moment where things were so wonderful in the world that social democracy, whether it's the Democrats in the States or Labour in the UK or many of the continental European parties, were the sort of natural parties of government, and they'd taken over not an active role but a sort of stewardship of capitalism, and that everything in the garden was rosy and was all going to carry on and there'd be no problems. Well, it was unfortunate, because to look after your democracy, you need to be constantly active and constantly vigilant. If you regard it as a system that's just there and will always be there because it's always been around in our lifetimes, you are going to make a very serious mistake. And unfortunately, I think the level of complacency that appeared, not purely because of the end of politics writings, but that was there because of some good results, coincidentally. I think that level of complacency has a lot to be blamed for in terms of things not working properly now. And whether it was my party, the Labour Party with Tony Blair, or the Democrats with Clinton around the same time, and a little bit later Obama, it developed into a sort of the new status quo, a new elite, maybe the liberal elite, I don't know. But also, and most importantly, it meant there was poor leadership. There weren't people striving to make our democracies better. What existed was okay, and it was good for us, so we don't need to do much about it. Yes, you do. And you need to seize that, not just in this crisis moment of an election in 2020, but you need to do it on a daily basis. It needs to be a fundamental part of your life and your mantra if you're a Democrat, and particularly if you're in a leadership position. And that complacency, I think, led to failure to contest in a number of areas. Going back a little bit further, that whole debate between public spending and taxation, the Thatcher-Reagan ethos around that, the field was vacated by the Social Democrats and by some of the familiar figures that we know about and that I've mentioned. And we failed to actually put over some hard messages about there's no such thing as a free lunch, and how you get a good health service, how you get good education. You don't do it by abolishing local property taxes. You don't get it by constantly chipping away at income tax levels or city or county tax levels. There are consequences to that. And that battle was not really fought. And I think we are reaping that whirlwind now. Everywhere you look across the globe now, legislative power is weak, executive power is stronger, and judicial power is under attack. In the democratic world, those three things are big generalizations, but essentially true wherever you look. And maybe the Trump victory was the last chance for a wake-up call, that you've got to roll your sleeves up and you've got to be contesting these issues on a regular basis. So things like allowing a reform agenda to slip away. Let's try and make capitalism work a little bit better. But in terms of what your shopping list of things to do to make your democracy better goes, no, that wasn't out there, and it's not out there now. Certainly in democratic politics in the States and the UK, the agendas are very weak. They are negative. We are not the bad guys. That's not enough. You need to actually build people up. You need to strengthen people. Otherwise, that will slip away. And instead of having a reforming state through the legislature, executive, and overseen by the judiciary, you will find the corporate state, whether it's a private capitalist or state capitalist state within the global economies, will build up. So again, there are some really big battles which are not just about the personality of individual candidates, but they are long-term trend lines that need to be turned around. Another really big issue for me on the global stage is there are a lot of people who are not in the UK, not in the Western democracies, let's say Africa, parts of Asia, who are looking at the outcome of the battle between democracy and autocracy. In other words, between the sort of Westminster model, founding fathers model, versus the autocratic President Xi of China view about what can work. And there's an audience to this battle which is looking at which way shall we go. The sort of anti-colonial feeling that is around in Africa is very prone to saying, why should we just carry on doing what was left to us by the British, the Germans, the French, the Belgians, etc. Let's find a new way. What is the other way? So it's really important that democracy shapes up and proves itself as not only a holding mechanism, but actually can get stuff done, particularly in very, very poor countries. The other thing that's on test here in 2020, underlying a lot of this fuss and noise, is the sense of market versus society. The idea of it's okay to atomize, it's okay to break down old ties, it's okay to live with massive inequality, because the people who are arguing for a more social, society-based response in a number of policy areas often either are not speaking at all or are not making themselves heard, much of which comes back to the impact of social media. But before I go on to that, good old-fashioned mainstream media too has really got to come to the party here. Again, I can't speak with authority about the States, but in the UK, the BBC, which was once unimpeachable as a news source, is now being pilloried by people in the UK, not least because it takes its news as sources close to number 10 Downing Street. And you know, I think we can do a lot better. There's a history of great investigative journalism, and that needs to be rediscovered, particularly because of the impact of social media. If you want to see how bad social media can get, have a look at China. I'll bring another book out, which is Kai Strittmatter's We Have Been Harmonized, frightening book, and another blockbuster which is worth a look at is Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which outlines how things have developed very, very rapidly in a sort of Wild West way, that you can do all these things and they won't have any impact. You don't really need to have proper regulation. Yes, you do. And I think that's a battle to be fought as we emerge from the campaign in 2020, because it has definitely strongly influenced our politics and the poisoning of our elections, both in the UK and in the US, and the Brexit campaign in the UK. That needs to be resolved now. And it reminds me a little bit of the antitrust battles in the United States with Carnegie and all those guys. It is possible to take on the giants, but you need to have a view, and you need to have a view on holding social media giants, the FANGs as they're called, to account, and ensuring that they are seen and act as publishers of information, not just a shop window that anyone can put anything into. So I'm conscious I should be winding up. I'm even a little bit over time right now, but one or two answers, and they're big, I guess, philosophical answers about democracy. One is democracy is not a steady state. It is an organic, it requires an evolution. It's got to be seen as an evolutionary organism. It needs to be changed and improved and burnished and polished and made real for the times in which we live, not be a snapshot of something that was, and as a great believer in what the Founding Fathers did, and also a great believer in a written constitution for the UK, not good enough just to say, let's have a look at what they did. We've got to get up to date. One of the things that I'm doing, just as one of those items of reform, is around deliberative democracy, and trying to ensure that people have a route into democracy other than at election time alone. In other words, have microcosms of people selected in whatever form you like, assemblies, citizens' juries, and let them loose on issues so that they can consider slowly and carefully and in their own time, in good democratic conditions, what they can do to actually influence the places in which they live. That's just one, but there has to be a proper reform platform rather than a let's not be tied down to anything because our political opponents will try to make hay with that. No, let's be really clear with people, because we're reaching the point of choices now, which hasn't been with a post-war consensus, has not been necessary very often. It is necessary now. People need to make some really serious choices, and we need to have the leaders in our democratic parties who can put those things forward. So activity goes hand in hand with democracy, vigilance, participation, and a degree of optimism. We aren't as bad as a human species as we're pointed out to be. We can actually do these things. There's some good stuff around. I'm sure many of you have seen Steven Pinker's stuff. This is just one in terms of the better angels of our nature. Well worth a look if you want to cheer up a little bit and see that we're not all bad all the time. I like this one in the last couple of months, Rutger Bregman, on humankind, and that we are capable of being good people, social people, people who value kindness and love above division and hatred, and the good guys have got to win those battles. Lots of other stuff. The only one, just to show finally, my good friend from Stanford University, Professor James Fishkin. This is as good as it gets in terms of looking at how deliberative democracy can work in any country in the world, and it's happening all over the globe, so it's got to take a central place. So 2020 is a vital election. It's going to be really important. All I would say immediately, beyond all this sort of future gazing, is don't do what we did on Brexit and think the people are not stupid enough to vote themselves out of one of the big three trading blocs in the world, in the middle of a recession, in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of difficult times. Yes, they are, unless we are active and put our case and people get the chance to listen to that. So unlike me, who thought we would win the ballot on Brexit and we would stay in the European Union, don't be like me on this occasion. Don't leave anything in the tank, as they say. Get out between now and polling day to ensure that our democracy at least has a fighting chance of surviving 2020 And I hope, optimistically, America can take its position of leading in the world, and above all, leading the democracies of the world, so that we can fight against the problems such as climate change, which are existential. We need America to win this election for America's sake, but also for the rest of the planet too. If you need to talk to me or would like to talk to me on any of the things I've raised, use that email, grahamwilliamallen@outlook.com, and I'd be glad to hear from you. Good luck in November, and don't leave anything in the tank.